a huge weekend of college football just passed, and another huge weekend is on the way. To talk about it, I got my man Andy Staples of the Andy and Ari Show. Andy, what's going on?
What is up, Dukes? Yeah, it's weird because we circled this October 12th, and we're like, that's the weekend. That's going to be the amazing one. And it's always the ones we never expect.
The middle child.
Alabama's right? Playing Vandy. Who's worried about that?
Right, man. It was some crazy football this week. And before we go any further, guys, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button to On 3 Recruits. All right, so we can start. I want to get to next week. Let's start with last week. What is your immediate takeaway from the Alabama-Vanderbilt game?
It's very general and probably a little reductive, but Nick Saban's not at Alabama anymore. Like that is as crazy as that is. Like, yeah, Nick Saban lost games in the SEC, but never lost a game like that. Probably the last game he lost like that at Alabama was the Louisiana Monroe game. And look, Vanderbilt is pretty good this year. We saw them take Missouri to overtime. We saw them beat Virginia Tech. We know Vanderbilt can play, but you're Alabama. Like, you should not be in a game like that with Vandy. And Vandy didn't win in a fluky fashion either. Right. Vandy just kept taking it to Alabama. They did, have some kind of nuts on the table plays, like that 4th and 2 pass from Pavia that was a touchdown. But the thing about it is they just straight up beat them. It wasn't, a weird play, a weird bounce, a straight, wacky turnover. It wasn't anything like that. And so I think that's the part you look at and go, okay, how fundamentally different is Alabama without Nick Saban? Because we didn't think they were going to be different at all after we watched them play Georgia. And now, even though they gave up the lead, they still came back and won. And we appreciate Georgia's talent level. So you're looking at that and going, oh, they're just going to keep on right on rolling. But then you look at this and go, all right, so where's the next landmine for Alabama? And it's crazy because, they come out, they're 21.5 point favorite this week against South Carolina, which probably has, quite a few more NFL prospects on the roster than Vandy does. And we just saw South Carolina get housed by Ole Miss. But we've also seen South Carolina kick the crap out of Kentucky. So, like, are we sure Alabama can just come back, bounce back, and roll over these teams? I don't know.
All right, so you talked about South Carolina coming to town. This game is going to be really important recruiting-wise because you got a lot of 5-star and blue-chip prospects are going to be in Eugene, Oregon this weekend. So right now, the guys that Alabama has in this class, they have to keep and they have to put on a really good performance. So if you're Alabama or you're on Alabama's recruiting staff, what do you say to the players to your recruits after a game where you lose to Vandy to keep them engaged?
Well, you pull the old, the same trick that everybody else uses that Alabama's never been able to use. Well, if we had you, we wouldn't have lost to Vandy. Isn't that an all jobs open kind of situation? Like, hey, if you come, you go win a job right away. Right. Because, and that's how Nick Saban did it. That's how Kirby Smart does it. Like, it's not BS when they say that. Like, if you come and you can play, you're going to play. Right. And I think now you're looking at it like, okay, I can play immediately, and there's a good chance that they're going to need me. Because these teams are not as deep. Like, you just can't stack 5-stars the way you could before. Even if you have them, you're not going to be able to keep them all if they're not playing immediately. So, like, if you are a 5-star recruit, it's interesting. You don't even have to look as much anymore. Like, because I know that, it used to be you'd have these guys that you could tell that I'm a playing time guy. Like, I'm going to go to where I can start as a freshman. And I think at Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State and places like that, you would look at those and maybe say, oh, okay, I might move down the list here because they're just too loaded at my position. Nobody's too loaded, especially if you are a 5-star prospect. Like, there is nobody so loaded that you can't go in and have a chance to play.
Right. Especially if you're one of those guys, right? All right, so Bama Online had a great interview with Duke Johnson, who's one of the top-rated athletes. He may be the number 2 overall athlete in the country, if I'm not mistaken. If not 2, he's 1. Definitely top 2. How they said top 2 and not 2. All right, so he says and his response to the game that we know the Bama standard. I'm not concerned. What does the Bama standard right now look like to you?
Well, we don't know what the Bama standard is because we know what Nick Saban's Bama standard was. Like, it's going to take some time for Kalen DeBoer to establish what his standard is. Right. And when you have a loss to Vanderbilt there, it's hard to imagine it's the same as Nick Saban's. But again, in Nick Saban's first year, they lost to Louisiana Monroe. Now, the difference is Nick Saban did that with the roster he inherited from Mike Shula. With the, you had, I believe that was the one where one of their best running backs got caught selling drugs in the parking lot of the facility. So, like, it was a different time at Alabama in 2007 than it is now, where Kalen DeBoer took over a team that was pretty much ready-made to compete. And I think that's the thing. We don't know what his standard is going to be. We're going to watch him coach for a little bit before we can figure that out. Now, you can talk about the Bama standard all you want, because I've heard all these different players at different schools talk about the standard at their school. The standard doesn't change if the coaching staff doesn't change. If if there's not massive turnover, there's not some sort of inciting event that can change everything. But the greatest of all time retiring is that type of inciting event. You can keep people, and they kept most of the roster together. They kept a lot of the staff, but it doesn't matter. Like, it's not the same. So it's up to Kalen DeBoer to establish a standard now. And we know what Alabama fans want. What their standard is the national title or bust.
Right.
So my guess is the players are going to keep it that way.
No, and I agree. But I also think that one thing Bama has going for them is that they're playing so many young guys. There was at one point, I think they said there were 22 to 23 guys, true freshmen, that had gotten playing time this year, which is incredible. And we know that playing time is a sell. As they continue to rebrand the standard, and I say rebrand because, as you said, that Coach Saban is Kalen DeBoer standard. Right, yeah. It's different. How big of a sell do you believe that telling these guys, well, actually, let me rephrase that. How much do you feel like playing guys early may have contributed to the lapse in focus last week against Vanderbilt?
Well, that's the thing. The younger your team is, the more apt they are to be subject to the ups and downs of a season. Like, that win against Georgia is huge, and a super old team would understand, hey, you can't celebrate that too long. You've got to turn around. It doesn't matter who you play next week. They're going to be coming for your necks. A younger team, you might get a little caught up in things. And you think about Alabama in the before the transfer rules changed, like, there would have been such intense competition at practice for reps in the Vanderbilt game that it would have kept things pretty sharp. But now, I mean, look at what Alabama has lost depth-wise. Like, look at how many guys are on Florida State's team from Alabama. Look at like Trey Amos is at Ole Miss. Like, how many guys have they lost who, even if they would not have been the biggest stars on Alabama, would be contributing to Alabama, would be older and kind of more understanding of how these things work. Right. And I think that's the part that it's not just Alabama. Everybody's missing that now who was used to having that. Georgia's missing that now. Ohio State is probably the least, they're missing it the least, but they'll be missing it next year. The reason they're missing it the least this year is they have a group of guys that really liked playing together, that wanted to come back for one more run, a bunch of old guys. When they leave, they're going to have the same issues because you have the same schools, just like with the SEC schools, picking off the bottom of their roster, picking off the backups and saying, hey, come here and start rather than wait another year to start there. You just don't have that level of depth. You don't have that level of experience. And when you don't, it makes it harder to deal with the ups and downs of the season.
Do you think it's more important, basically, the Georgia win and the height of that and all of the recruits being there? Or do you think it's more important how Bama responds after a loss in terms of recruiting?
I think everybody, not just recruits, I think everybody in the world is watching how Bama responds to this. Because we haven't seen Bama in this situation. So this is a big test for Kalen DeBoer. And yeah, if I'm a recruit, I want to see how they handle this. We saw it with Georgia. How did Georgia respond to losing to Alabama? Well, they went out and they beat Auburn and did it in convincing fashion. So if you are someone who's trying to decide, do I want to play for Kirby Smart? Do I want to play for Kalen DeBoer? And that describes quite a few people. Like,
right.
You're watching how Kalen DeBoer responds to this so you can compare that to how Kirby Smart did.
Yeah, and I think and it's a really similar kind of situation with South Carolina coming in and home game. You got a team that's a little plucky, but very beatable.
That
right?
you should beat, but if you mess up, you can lose to.